Well, welcome back, everybody. I hope you enjoyed coffee. In this session, we're going to get a bit of a more of a regional, a bit more granular session on not the big picture 60,000 feet helicopter that Glenn described, which doesn't exist, looking down. But coming down a bit, we're going to first hear from Scotland. We're fortunate to have Simon White here, who was first of all a civil servant and then spent over 15 years in the NHS managing projects. He's had a busy pandemic. He's been managing COVID in Scotland, and now he's moved on for Scan4Safety. Simon, you're going to talk to us about your experience in Scotland. Thank you.
Morning, everybody. Thank you for having me. As introduced, my name's Simon White. I'm the Programme Director for the NHS Scotland campaign, NHS Scotland Scan4Safety programme. And I'm going to talk to you this morning a little bit about the programme in Scotland, how we've set it up, our approach, what our vision is. I'll talk a little bit about our structure and how we've set up our work streams, our programmes within that. And I want to focus on a little bit around stakeholder engagement and also some of the challenges that we have. So in terms of a bit of background, we had our business case approved back in October 2001. And I've already said thanks to Owen and the team in Deloitte for developing such a robust business case that it got approved by the Scottish Government. Quite an achievement. And that was to kind of establish a programme to implement point-of-care scanning alongside the adoption of global GS1 global data standards. Excuse me. As you can see there, the regulatory drivers around the Medical Devices Devices Safety Review and the Medicines and Medical Devices Act 2021, and that resulted in UK-wide commitment to establish the MDIS system, which is going on. Sorry, the bit that I've got there around National Services Scotland, we were asked to establish and deliver a programme in partnership with the Scottish Government and other health boards. And that really began in earnest in January this year as we started to develop a programme team and make sure that we had the right setup in place. For those that don't know, National Services Scotland is one of 22 health boards in Scotland. We are in effect a special health board, so we're not a territorial board. There are 14 territorial boards and 8 what we call national boards. In ours, National Services Scotland, it focuses on a number of areas, such as health facilities, procurement and logistics, assurance services, provision of blood and cells in terms of Scottish National Blood Transfusion. We do a lot in terms of supporting the medical, dental and ophthalmic areas in Scotland, providing payment services. And we also offer legal services, counter-fraud, and also programme management services. Scan4Safety is one of a number of national programmes that we're doing, and we're responsible for delivering that on behalf of the Scottish Government, as it says there. So as I mentioned earlier on, the definition activity started in January, and that looked like a number of programmes that were in flight. 2 of the ones that I've mentioned on the slide there around the National Inventory Management System, which is led by one of my colleagues, Lindsay Robertson. Some of you may know her and I've met her. And also the National Medical Equipment Database. And that was a programme that has been set up really as a result of the kind of pandemic and the questions that we had around the inventory that we had. Things like ventilators and understanding where they were, how we could move them, how we could be a bit more agile in terms of kind of the response to the pandemic as it was happening. And that kind of was a programme that kind of morphed out of there. We also had the UDI task force that was set up, and some of you again may have been involved in some of that. And that's now going to become known as the data hub, the medical device data hub, where we are looking to bring together some of the kind of key data sets in there and how we hold them from the national systems and how we actually kind of move them on and send data across to MDIS at various points, depending on what that requirement is. In terms of kind of what's going to be happening in the next kind of few weeks or so, we've got our first programme board set up, and that'll happen at the end of this month. And we hope to have that green light at that board where we get the approval for our definition activity and be able to move on into how the implementation is going to look going forward. So fingers crossed. I've put up there on that slide the vision statement for the programme. And again, one of the things that I wanted just to kind of focus on, I suppose, a little bit here was around patient safety. We are very much in the position, or taking the approach that we'll position this programme with patient safety at the forefront of it. And that is probably a little bit different from some of our other programmes that we've done over the years. And I'll come on to that in terms of kind of some of the other things that we do to kind of try and emphasise that message as we develop. I won't read out the vision statement line by line, but just a couple of things to draw out of it in terms of the kind of that improved data and MI systems to support decision making, driven by clinical outcomes, and allows us to kind of have that greater visibility of our inventory across the whole kind of landscape within Scotland. And that'll allow us to kind of measure the resources cost and hopefully the kind of clinical productivity that we so desire. So again, these are all kind of draft things just now, because these will form part of the approvals process that we have in place for some of the, as I say, the definition activity at the end of the month. So you may see these changing as people start to kind of get more of a review of them, but by and large, I think the position is at this time that this is what we should go on going forward. So apologies in advance for the number of words and the slightly kind of the structure diagram here. It's not, but I thought it would be helpful to have that in here. There's a couple of things I wanted just to mention on it. I'll talk a little bit in the next slide about each of the 5 pillars that are in there and what they actually cover and what they're trying to do. But again, some of the things just to draw out of here, we have a Scan4Safety programme board that we've established. And we're trying to keep that very succinct, very tight in terms of having very senior people that are on there and have that as our key decision-making forum for Scotland in terms of how the programme will progress. And to that end, we've split out a kind of what was some of the work that was going on in the UDI programme board, which was a fairly large board. There was between 30 and 40 people that sat on that programme board, which perhaps isn't the best forum for decision-making. What we're going to set up, or what we're looking to set up just now, is to have a kind of clinical reference group. And that will be a fairly large forum in terms of I suppose, the assurance that it can provide from a clinical perspective, that what we're doing is meeting the need and is fit for purpose. And the other side of that, you'll see the technical assurance group. There are 3 work streams within this programme that all have a significant technical element to it. And it's critical for us to make sure that actually what we do and what we bring together fits architecturally. We have that assurance from the right people who are involved in a lot of these systems. And we, as a National Services Scotland, we are responsible for, certainly in some programmes and other IT systems, for implementing a lot of national systems across the health boards in Scotland. But just a couple of other things to draw out of this diagram. On the left-hand side, you'll see some of the cross-cutting areas that we'll set up and we'll establish. And one of the critical things, as I mentioned earlier, is around clinical leadership. And again, I'll touch on it a little bit when we start to talk about some of the stakeholder engagement and how we position the programme. But I think everybody that's involved in the programme recognises that the success really does depend on that clinical engagement and clinical leadership that can be shown and help to drive it forward. And that's what we want to do. The other things around there are in the PMO, the Programme Management Office, the data and digital and information governance work that needs to go on. Again, absolutely critical, and I'll touch on a little bit as well around the kind of comms and engagement side of things and how we deal with stakeholders. So you can see from the diagram I've boxed it in terms of again, what the scope of the programme is there. And then the acknowledgement on the right-hand side is there are a number of groups that are in existence, predominantly within the Scottish Government, have a lot of stakeholders that we really want to get involved with around the kind of digital strategy portfolio boards, which is linked again to our enabling technology board. And that's a very kind of that's a very wide landscape in terms of kind of trying to make sure that what we develop and build here fits with those wider pieces and fits with the broader strategies. So that's really just an acknowledgement of that in terms of how we need to kind of tie into some of these areas going forward. The other thing that I wanted to mention on this slide finally is the link to the CMO, and that for us is really a brilliant piece in terms of will help us enormously going forward, that we have this position from a patient safety perspective and making sure that actually the CMO himself is taking a very keen interest in the programme, what it's going to deliver and how it's going to do that. We do have a dual reporting into the Health and Social Care Management Board, which is chaired by the Director General for the NHS in Scotland. But having the direct link into the Chief Medical Officer, is absolutely critical in terms of bringing that clinical engagement to the fore. So in terms of the actual work streams, the 5 areas, the 5 pillars that you saw in the diagram, I've put a couple of bullets against all of them here in terms of kind of what they're actually looking to do and go forward. And I won't go through line by line, but just to draw out some of them. So the standards is fairly self-explanatory. And Ed, who stood up earlier on, is working and leading that kind of area of the programme, which is absolutely brilliant for us from a Scottish point of view, given Ed's background and where he's been in Scan4Safety in England. And the key bit around there as well is around communications, what comes out of that work stream, because it does affect pretty much every other work stream within the programme. So that is really absolutely critical. Ed's colleagues and one of our other colleagues, Frankie Wallace, who some of you I'm sure are aware, who know, is leading on our supplier engagement. And I know there was a lot of conversation yesterday around that and how that's going to go forward. It's certainly down south and the keenness of suppliers to become involved in it. So again, some of the things that we're looking to do is develop a really robust engagement plan and then how we actually can engage with suppliers going forward. The next two on there are what I call the programmes that are already in flight. So the inventory management system was one that's been up and running now for a little while. It has rolled out across a couple of health boards and a couple of sites across Scotland. The ambition is to roll it out wider, obviously. It has hit a little bit of delay. It is going through a little bit of replanning. But certainly the hope is that by the end of 2022 and hopefully maybe by autumn, that rollout will have been completed before it moves on to an earnest point of care scanning in the same sites. So that's kind of really the kind of key thing for the inventory management system. The medical equipment database, as I touched on, was born out of some of the stuff from the pandemic and understanding and helping us as an organisation to understand where our kit was, where our equipment was and so on. And we certainly didn't have it in place before the pandemic to the way that we'd want it to. But again, this is one of these programmes that is undergoing a bit of a review just now. We need to understand in terms of the way we want to actually implement that. So it is very much, hasn't rolled out yet. It will go through a procurement process to purchase a system. And that's kind of pretty much at this point, it's developing the specifications and reviewing the specifications just now before that procurement activity commences. Last but not least, certainly the Medical Device Data Hub. Most of that activity came out of the UDI programme that was in existence before. And this is all about kind of collecting data from the existing sources that we have across Scotland. We are in a slightly, I suppose, a kind of fortunate position that we have a lot of national systems that are already out there. So we have a national system for procurement, we have a national system for finance, we have national systems for staff, and we can build on those and we can use those in terms of building interfaces, and rather than going out and purchasing another system that's going to have to be implemented and put across a number of health boards. So our approach at this point really is to kind of try and look at what's out there, use what's out there, and actually try and tie it together a little bit so that we can get the right information back in and through to systems like MDIS as and when required. So that's really, I suppose, some of the kind of key activities that are there. So I mentioned earlier around stakeholder engagement, and it's actually quite heartening in some of the conversations I've had over the last day or so with others, some of you in this room, around the importance of the clinical buy-in and leadership to the programme and the success for it. So this is something that we've talked about at length and how we actually try and get that. I mentioned the link into the CMO's office and having that. Certainly that office fighting your corner is a great position to be in. So certainly our emphasis will be on engaging with clinicians going forward and how we actually make it a bit of a no-brainer, really, in terms of saying, look, this is a very obvious case. It is something that will benefit you. We know we have to do some work in terms of defining those benefits to a detail that can actually say very robustly, this is how it will make your life better. This isn't a kind of money release that you'll get in 40 years. This is something that can happen relatively quickly in comparison to other change initiatives and when you can expect that to happen. Obviously, the other areas in there in terms of the senior managers within territorial health boards, chief executives, directors of finance, planning teams, these are all absolutely critical as well. It's not to push them down that list, but it's to recognise that actually for some of the kind of areas in here, having the clinicians on board is going to be absolutely critical for us. We know there's a number of existing governance groups out there. We know there's a number of groups who will commission new activity going forward. And again, from the kind of a programme perspective, it's critical for us to actually ensure understanding where those commissionings are taking place, because we do need to do that stop and make sure that we're always aligned to the strategy going forward. Some of the programmes I've been involved in, some of the programme reviews, that sometimes doesn't happen as well as it could. And again, it's something we take in terms of the lessons learned from other areas. So looking at those existing governance groups, understanding what they're doing, when they're going to commission activity is going to be key for us going forward. And in terms of what we say to these groups, in terms of the strategy, we'll hopefully do a fairly robust comms and engagement strategy, looking at each of the stakeholder groups to provide an update on what the programme's doing, what the deliverables and timescales will be, understanding and discussing what issues may surface, if any, and then agreeing any future engagement activity. How are we going to sustain that going forward? This is not going to be a short-term programme in Scotland in comparison to others. So we have to understand what is actually going to work in terms of that long-term engagement and how that's going to evolve over the course of the programme. Challenges. And again, I think I said it earlier, it was actually quite heartening to know that this isn't unique to Scotland, and some of the things that we've got up here, I've heard over the last 24, 48 hours from some of you, which is really good. In some ways, not so good in others. But certainly capacity right at the top there. A lot of the resource, not just centrally, not just within the programme team, not just the IT people and the procurement people, but within boards as well. As you tend to find, certainly in Scotland, who again, it's one person who does a lot of the kind of stock control. We have a lot of very varied size boards across Scotland. So we have obviously the large ones around the central belt, Glasgow, Edinburgh, Aberdeen, and so on. But we do have some very small boards as well. And you tend to find that the resources in there, it's down to one person who does stock control. It's down to one person who maybe works in theatres, or a couple of people. And that gives us a challenge going forward in terms of that engagement, where this sits in terms of the priority. And that's how we're going to have to kind of acknowledge that going forward. And the bit I've put there around engagement and planning at a local level is absolutely going to be critical. Who is it that you've got in there? How does that develop into a robust and realistic plan of implementation? Priority. Scan4Safety is going to be one of a number of initiatives as the country starts to kind of get moving and out of the back of the pandemic. There's going to be a number of initiatives, a number of kind of national programmes and local programmes where chief executives and others on board are going to have to decide. So where does Scan4Safety sit in terms of the priority around maybe say 20 other initiatives that they're being asked to deliver as well. So that's something that we need to kind of address as well. Around implementation, the conversations have really just kind of started, I would say, in the last 4 weeks around implementation and how we're going to look at that. So the questions we've got there, we don't have an answer just now. I don't have a lot of detail around implementation and how we're going to do it. We know that the IMS team are going out and they're going to implement their IMS system. We want to kind of try and maximise that in terms of making sure that when they're going out to the boards that we don't actually then have to go back and revisit those boards. So we have to acknowledge that in terms of saying, right, what else do we want them to ask when we go out? And that's something that we're actively looking at with the team just now. So the questions I've got there, we want to identify some more pilot sites. We want to learn from the pilots that we've got in existence just now. We want to have a discussion around specialty and how we actually can address that and where does it fit in terms of priority, high risk, and by health board. As I said at the start, this will be a number of priorities that boards have to decide and talk about, and we need to kind of have that conversation with health boards as well in terms of where they see us and be realistic around that. The bottom, on the ways of working, the programme needs to introduce a number of changes, and it's going to result in some cultural changes as well. Sometimes wholesale changes in terms of how theatres are working and what that actually looks like. So again, that's something that we need to kind of think about in terms of how do we effectively implement that going forward. And that's going to be a challenge for us based on everything else that's on that slide. So that's kind of I suppose the kind of hard bit, I think. For us, the next step's really around the completing the definition activity for the programme. And we will establish the governance as I've talked about there, and we'll get that kind of set up, and it will be proportionate and hopefully fit for purpose. It will be, I'm sure. The engagement with stakeholders is critical. And also the bullet that I never put on there and I should have done is around learning the lessons from others. And it's been great to come to this conference and understand and listen to what people have experienced elsewhere. I hope to have spoken to some of you over the last day or so, and I hope to build more relationships with people here and hopefully learn, and you can perhaps learn from us as well in terms of going forward and how we actually deliver this at a UK level as well. So those are the kind of challenges, and those are the things I'm looking forward to in the coming months kind of thing. So I think that was it from me. Apologies for the croaky voice at the start. Managed to get over it. And I'm happy to take any questions, or I think there's maybe going to be a panel later on.